Hello, this is Linda Bourne with this week's edition of Caregiver's Corner. If you are a Christian, you will find things that will help and encourage you in your faith walk. If you're a caregiver, you will find some things that will help you to make that transition into the caregiving role. And if you're a Christian caregiver, you'll get the most good probably of anyone out of this video. Making the transition into the role of taking care of someone who used to take care of you so that there's a role reversal is horrendously difficult. People cope with that in all different ways. Avoidism is a common thing to do. Escapism, just anything you can do to help you to get away from the grief. But when you become the primary caregiver for someone who has dementia or some other debilitating disease, and when that person's a loved one, there isn't any escape from the grief. So this week's presentation is from my book, My Mom Has Alzheimer's, Inspiration and Help for Caregivers, and it has to do with facing the grief. I want to read to you this passage from my book. Life is full of transitions, and most of us don't like this fact. We would prefer to attain a place of comfort and safety and clutch it to our hearts to keep, but we are not allowed to do so. Just as ocean tides ebb and flow, our lives are always in motion. When my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I looked around for the stronger, more capable sibling who would step forward and become her primary caregiver. And of course, I didn't find anybody because I'm an only child. And so I became mom's primary caregiver by default, and there was really never anyone less well suited to the role. I am an only child. I have always been my mother's favorite. She was always my cheerleader, my friend, my advocate, the person I could trust in any situation to be my supporter. And suddenly that was gone. And instead, I was the one who was supposed to be the strong person, and I wasn't. What I found is that it is important to acknowledge what you've lost in your relationship with that person you're taking care of, but don't get lost in the grief. Because when you become so overwhelmed by what is now lacking in your life as a result of your loved one's illness that you can't see beyond it, it causes you to detach from the pain and the suffering and the difficulties that your loved one is facing, and you don't want to do that. There is a middle road to walk. I found that if I focused on the pathos of my mother's agony, because she was so confused, and it really was heartbreaking to see her struggle with trying to find her way when her short-term memory was pretty much shot. And I wanted her to be happy. I wanted her to be okay. And at the same time, I would vacillate between that perspective and grieving over what I'd lost. And so it's a balancing act, and you are going to fall off first on one side and then on the other. But be careful that you don't detach from your loved one. As you become aware of that need to move into the caregiving mindset, and there is a need to do that, you have to relate to your loved one from the perspective of a caregiver rather than according to the rules of your past relationship roles. As you do that, be careful you don't detach from your loved one, because no matter what happens, they are still related to you by love, by whatever relationship you share, husband, wife, daughter, son, mother, father. Those relationships don't go away. Those heart ties are still there. An illustration that kind of helped me to move over into that caregiving mindset was that when my children are asleep, when they were babies and they were asleep, I still loved them, even though they weren't awake and they weren't able to put their arms around my neck and they weren't able to interact with me. They weren't doing anything at all. They were just sleeping. But because they're my children, I had that strong love for them that wasn't going to go away no matter what. Just because my mother is no longer able to be my cheerleader, my advocate, the person I would always phone first and to share any accomplishment I had, she's not able to do that for me anymore. Just because she's not able to do that for me anymore doesn't mean that I don't still love her. Not just because of who she was, but because of who she is still. I've learned to love her for who she is, Alzheimer's and all. It's part of the whole package. Be careful you don't detach from your loved one. Yes, there's some pain to be endured in that, but the pain of staying connected to your loved one is much less than the pain of detaching from them and becoming kind of impersonal and oftentimes a little bit angry around the edges in your interactions with them. You don't want to communicate to that person that they have let you down by no longer supporting you as they once did. They will know that they are disappointing you in some way, and it will just complicate your caregiver-patient relationship. And so this week's message: face the grief. Don't allow that grief to let you detach from your loved one, and see if you can work your way through it to the degree that you can come out on the other side able to appreciate the fact that your loved one is still present with you, and that there still are joys to be had and laughter to share and hope for your future, even on those days when you don't feel that way. Next week, we're going to be talking about releasing resentment and anger. Once you've worked your way through that grieving process over what you've lost in your relationship with your loved one, very often, almost inevitably, resentment and anger will rear their ugly heads and have to be dealt with. And so next week we'll talk about releasing those in a healthy way. Until then, take care.